Welcome. This is DA Sports. I'm your host, DASASI. Thank you. This is episode 46. Now, in today's episode, we have a couple of things to get into. Of course, we have to recap the NBA All-Star Weekend. Specifically, we're going to dig into the slam dunk contest and the actual NBA All-Star Sunday. Then we're going to finish this episode going over the 5 teams that should have the most interesting offseason in the NFL. Now, let's get into it. So to start, like I said, we got to get into NBA All-Star Weekend. That's right. NBA All-Star Weekend was this past weekend, and it was full of the usual events. They had the skills competition, they had the three-point competition, the slam dunk contest, and then, of course, the NBA All-Star Game. Now, to start, I'm going to touch on the NBA Slam Dunk Contest. Now, for those that didn't get a chance to watch it, I understand why. In a general sense, the Slam Dunk Contest has been disappointing in recent years, but I would say that this year was definitely better than the last 2 years. Mac McClung is the Slam Dunk champion again for the 3rd year in a row. And he did do more impressive dunks where he got all 50s in all of his dunks. I definitely think that as the only slam dunk champ 3 times in a row slam dunk champion, that's definitely a feather in his cap that he can hold on to for the rest of his life. I know people were talking about, well, is Mac McClung one of the best dunkers of all time? No. I mean, because if you just take in dunkers who, like, that's what they do as a specialty, there are people who were never in an NBA roster who could dunk better than almost every NBA player that has ever dunked, right? Like, there are actual dunk contest leagues around the world. There's actually been a couple of people from, like, France who have been, like, all-world dunkers in terms of the best dunkers to ever dunk the ball. So we're not basing it on that. We're basing it usually off of, NBA players. Like, meaning you had skill enough to be one of the best basketball players in the entire world, and you can also dunk. So that's why I think it's like a separate category. Mac McClung is great at dunking, but I believe he's only played in 3 NBA games, so I'm not going to put him in the same category as other NBA dunkers when we're ranking all-time dunkers. But with that being said, I'm not taking anything away from him as a dunker. He's really good. He has essentially saved the dunk contest. The only reason that this year was a little better than the previous years is this was the first year where the second place dunker was actually good. I forget the guy's name, but the rookie from the San Antonio Spurs, he had some really good dunks. And if it wasn't for McClung, having the next level of dunk, I think that it could have gone the other way, but McClung just outshined him and was able to get his 3rd slam dunk win in a row. Now, after the slam dunk contest and it getting some more attention than maybe a little more than it did previously, we had some interesting tweets that went out where Ja Morant said that he might participate in next year's slam dunk contest. And then I think Giannis said something about he might think about it too. Honestly, I don't think Giannis should participate in the slam dunk contest. Yes, he's big and strong and he can dunk powerful, have some powerful dunks, but he's not an innovative dunker. Honestly, most dunkers who are 6'10" and up, they can't do much in terms of, like, creativity. That's why Aaron Gordon was such a anomaly, because I believe Aaron Gordon's like 6'9", and he was able to do dunks where it wasn't just, oh, I'm big and I could dunk the ball easily. He was doing athletic feats that you usually only see from smaller players that are guards, who are between like 6'1" and 6'4". So I don't want to see Giannis in the dunk contest, but It did get me to thinking about if I could pull anybody from the NBA to be in next year's dunk contest, who would it be? So I put together four names because there's always four participants for the dunk contest. This would be the four. If everybody has said, okay, we're going to make ourselves available to do it, these are the four people that I would want to see at next year's dunk contest. It would be John Morant. It would be Anthony Edwards. It would be Jalen Green. And it would be Zion Williamson. I think if all four of them came together and did a dunk contest, even if the winning dunk wasn't as spectacular or as innovative as what Mac McClung was doing, I think the ratings would be through the roof. I think people would enjoy it more because it would be for legit NBA players who play in the NBA on a daily basis, barring injury, because obviously Zion is not playing on a daily basis. But barring injury, these are legit NBA players. These are all players that can carry a team and who can also do huge explosive dunks. And I think that energy, being in the building, being able to get like the crowd into it, getting the sense of anticipation would be great. So where even if the dunks weren't at the same level, it would still be entertaining because you'd be seeing it would kind of remind us of like days in the past when you had like superstars participating in the dunk contest. And I think that's what essentially we need to get back to. So that would be my dream lineup for next year: Ja, and Jalen, and Zion. Now, moving on from the dunk contest, we're going to get into the All-Star game as itself, the one from Sunday. Now, there was a couple things. The All-Star game has definitely declined over the years, and the biggest thing and the biggest reason why it's declined is because it seems like the players don't really care about it. So it seems like every other year or so they keep changing the format. This year they did 4 different teams, and then they played like a little bracket in a sense where 4 teams became 2, and then the 2 played in the championship game. They also went back to the format where the scoring goes to a specific number, and then that's when the game ends. Overall, I would say that this year's All-Star game on Sunday was better than previous years, kind of similar to how I said about the slam dunk contest. It improved, and at the end of the day, that's what the NBA is hoping for, is for it to improve, and they did that. So for that, I give them credit. I think there was definitely more effort this year than previous years, and it's interesting because one of the things that I didn't like about it, which one of the things that Draymond Green kind of commented about, was I didn't like that there were rookies, like the young all-stars, rookie stars, who got to participate in Sunday's All-Star game. And Draymond made a point about, it takes a lot to make it to an All-Star game. It took a lot for him to, develop his game enough to be able to make it to an All-Star team, to be able to play on Sundays, not to play in the rookie sophomore game and stuff like that, but to actually get to play on that Sunday stage. And whereas this format, those rookies got to be on that Sunday stage right away, even though they're not all-stars. And so I think that's a valid point. But on the other hand, I think them playing made the other team, the OGs, play harder because they knew these young guys wanted to steal the show. These young guys wanted to take the most of this opportunity and win the game. And it took for the OGs to actually play hard in order for them to win. And I think that was the whole purpose behind this format, was to force effort. Because it's like without them saying anything, you get people who are going to play harder. It forces the opposition to play harder, which inevitably happened. And that's what everybody's really wanting, is just more effort. So I think from that standpoint, it did work out. I saw a bunch of different ideas being tossed around as far as how they can kind of manipulate this idea and just get the real all-stars in the game. I know some people talked about potentially maybe expanding the all-star selection from like 12 to 16 or something like that. And then, I know, right now it's 24, and they're saying expand it from 24 to 28 total, and then do 4 teams of 7, but they're all legit all-stars. Or somebody else suggested adding another team where it's like all-star snubs, but then I think you get into the same thing where it's like, well, they didn't really earn an all-star selection why are they playing in the All-Star game? I do think the idea of expanding it to 28 and then doing it 4 teams of 7 would be a good idea. I think, it's because it really just all it really takes is to get at least 2 of those teams that are full of players that actually want to play, that actually want to go out and win the game. You can't really incentivize these guys with like money, like, oh, $1 million for first place, because most of these guys that make it to an All-Star game are making so much more than that they're like, I don't really, it's not going to make or break their season if they get that extra bonus. So I don't think the money aspect is going to really drive them, but hopefully when they see the general public's feeling on this, that they continue to give more effort, especially because a lot of the younger players are the ones who are really interested in playing harder. So maybe that will kind of spread itself throughout everybody else, and we get a full-on regular game for seasons to come. Now, one thing that I will mention is something that's been floated, and I heard Rachel Nichols asking some of the players about, and they seem to be interested in. One thing I think they should add to next year's All-Star Weekend is a 1v1 challenge, like a king of the court situation. I think that would be amazing. Do it like a bracket style and have a 1v1 tournament. I think that would be excellent. I think people are competitive enough to where it's one thing to like not want to play defense and be lackadaisical when it's 5-on-5. You can be like, oh, it wasn't just me, it's the team. But if it's 1v1, it's solely on you. So are you gonna be lazy and get cooked in front of millions of viewers? No, you probably not. I think that'll really drive up competitiveness, and that's something that they should definitely look into and adding into next year's All-Star Weekend. Okay, now the next thing we're going to get into is about the NFL offseason. So what I'm going to do is talk about 5 teams that I think are going to have the most interesting off seasons. Now, these 5 teams are not in any particular order. It's not ranked from most interesting to like 5th most interesting. I'm just giving you 5 teams that I wrote down, thinking about the changes that this team is going to go through and why their off season is going to be interesting and why they got to make certain moves and so on and so forth. So, to start, the first team of the 5 teams that are going to have interesting NFL off seasons is going to be the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, the Chiefs are going to have some turnaround, and they've been in this process for the last 2 to 3 years where they went from, the explosive offensive team they had, losing some stars. They lost Tyreek. Last year, they lost L'Jarius Sneed, and as with anything, when you have a successful team, there's going to be more and more turnover as the years go. People have earned larger contracts who are on rookie contracts, and they also had some 1-year deals that are going to be expiring. So DeAndre Hopkins' contract is up, Hollywood Brown's contract is up. So the receiving core is going to be interesting. They definitely got to fill that in. Obviously, Xavier Worthy's still locked in, Rashee Rice is still locked in, but everybody else essentially is out the door. They also got to figure out what they're going to do with running back. I think Kareem Hunt was also on a 1-year deal. So it's going to be a lot of change there. Then their starting guard, Trey Smith, his contract's at an end. I think Nick Bolton, his contract is at an end, the starting middle linebacker. So there's a lot of changes that are coming. That rookie class was phenomenal, and a lot of them have made big impacts and created this team to what it is today. So they're going to really have to make some tough decisions because there's definitely going to be some crucial players that they just have to let go just from a numbers perspective. So it'll be really interesting to see which ones they let go, which position they decide to fill from free agency, which positions they decide to fill from the draft. And it'll really determine how next season is going to go. Will they be able to put together enough pieces to where they can get back to the Super Bowl again? Or will this actually be their first true rebuild year where they don't make the playoffs or barely make the playoffs and go out in the first round for the first time ever? We shall see, but it'll be interesting because these moves they make in the offseason are going to directly tie into what happens in relation to how Mahomes' legacy is measured. So definitely one of the most interesting off seasons of any team. Now, the next team that I'm going to mention as having an interesting offseason is the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, the Bengals are a team that also has a top tier quarterback, but they have a lot of decisions to make in terms of skill positions. Obviously, Jamar Chase needs a new deal. T. Higgins needs a new deal. Mike Gesicki needs a new deal. And Trey Hendrickson needs a new deal. Now, all four of these players, other than Gesicki is a tight end position that's not as like the top end of the tight end position is Kelsey, who's making about 15 to 17 million a year, whereas all these other positions, their top ends are making 30 to 40 million a year. So it's going to get dicey. And we know that the Bengals have a tradition of not wanting to play players, not wanting to pay players. So their ownership is relatively cheap. Obviously, they already were forced to do a big deal with Burrow. So, thankfully they got that done. I think, above all else, Jamar Chase is a priority. Even if you had to lose every other person I listed, Jamar Chase has to be resigned. I think they should have resigned him last year because then they would have saved themselves money, but they're dumb, so they didn't. But Jamar Chase is a lock. I don't think under any circumstances would they let Chase go or try to trade him. I think if they didn't re-sign Chase, Joe Burrow would probably leave because he would look at it like, you guys don't really care about trying to put together a winning team. So Jamar Chase, I think, is a lock. I think they're going to pair Jamar Chase with Joe Burrow for the rest of their careers, no matter what it costs. Even if they got to let go of every single player in the team, those two are going to play together. Now, the next thing I would say is they need to play Trey Hendrickson. Now, Hendrickson was the best. He actually led the league in sacks this year, and their defense was terrible overall. But he was the one bright spot on their defense as far as overall production. So I think they want to improve their defense, which is the only thing. That has to be their number one priority in terms of allowing Cincinnati to have a shot at getting back into the playoff mix. They got to improve their defense. So where do you build a defense from? Typically, you start at the defensive line. And when you've got a defensive lineman who's led the league in sacks and is top 5 in sacks over the last 2 to 3 years, you gotta re-sign him. So I think Jamar Chase and Henderson should be their priority, but it's possible that they only sign one of them. So we'll see how it goes. I know there's talk about them franchise tagging T. Higgins again. I don't know how that'll work with the cap. I think that might hamstring them a little too much as far as building the rest of the defense, but we'll see. But their offseason is definitely going to be very interesting. Now, the next team that I'm putting on this list of having one of the most interesting offseason is going to be the Minnesota Vikings. Now, for the Minnesota Vikings, their interesting part really comes down to one position, and that's quarterback. So they drafted J.J. McCarthy last year in the first round. Then J.J. McCarthy gets injured before the season and is out for the entire season. Now, granted, he wasn't supposed to start from the beginning of the season, but he was projected to eventually be a starter, and they were just giving Sam Darnold the start to see how it goes. Well, then Sam Darnold ended up having the best year of his career, and then the last 2 games he played like crap, and he looked like the old Sam Darnold. So now they got a decision to make. Do they just jump right into J.J. McCarthy, even though he has 0 reps? He didn't get any playing time at all last year. Or do they re-sign Sam Darnold because for most of the season he played great? Are they able to re-sign Sam Darnold to a 1 or 2 year deal? Would he agree to that so that they can kind of float the whole J.J. McCarthy thing for a year or so to see if he'll be ready for the following year? Or do they let Sam Darnold go because Darnold has now put himself in position to get a much larger contract, and then they pull one of these free agent quarterbacks from somewhere else? Aaron Rodgers is a free agent quarterback. Russell Wilson is a free agent quarterback. Justin Fields is a free agent quarterback. Kirk Cousins might be a free agent quarterback. There's also rumors that the Rams are not interested in re-signing Matt Stafford, so maybe he becomes available. There's so many interesting ways that could go with this. So, and I think as we've seen, if you don't have a quarterback, you don't have a team. So they got to make a decision, and how they structure this decision will really determine if, last season for Minnesota was a blip, or if it's a trend, if they're able to keep it going and progress and get better, or are they going to plummet and get worse. It's very possible that the Vikings could win their division next year. It's also very possible they could be last in their division this next year because so many other teams have gotten better. So definitely they're one of the teams that are having an interesting offseason. The next team has a similar situation, and that is the New York Jets. And New York Jets are also a team that are in a quarterback dilemma. They had Aaron Rodgers for 2 years. Well, technically, he was on the team for 2 years, but he only played for one because the first year he got injured. They announced in the last couple of weeks that they've decided that they're not going to re-sign Aaron Rodgers and let him be a free agent. They just changed over the coaching staff. They changed over the GM. So what direction do they go in? They don't have one of the top picks for drafting one of the two quarterbacks that people expect to go super early. So the thought process is they're probably going to lean on some of those free agent quarterbacks that I just mentioned. If they do, who do they lean towards? Who do they feel like they want to build around? Do they want to take a flyer on somebody who may have like 1 or 2 years left and then draft somebody later, in the first round or in the second round and let them develop? Or do they want to draft Sam Darnold because he's still relatively young and think, okay, he showed us enough to, we could sign him to a long-term deal? I don't know. I wouldn't be too confident in that, but they've got to make a decision. And considering the fact that their head coach is more of a defensive-minded head coach, how will that play a role in terms of what they make at the quarterback decision? Like, what is his mindset in terms of what they need, what they're looking for, what attributes are going to carry his team that's going to be heavily focused on the defensive side of the ball? We'll see. And, of course, the Jets are one of the largest markets, so it's going to be a lot of scrutiny around whatever they decide to do. And so that will make their offseason very interesting. And then the last team of the 5 most interesting off seasons in the NFL is going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers. They are in a similar situation to the last 2 teams with their quarterback. The difference for them is they had 2 of these free agent quarterbacks in-house. So are they going to make the decision to use one of those 2? Are they going to make the decision to let them both go? Do they feel like one of them they can sign to a long-term deal? Can they convince one of the 2 to sign a short-term deal while they still try to figure it out? Do they still go and draft somebody in the draft that they think can build behind one of the 2 that they had? Or do they go a completely different direction and let both of them go and pull one of these other free agent quarterbacks and draft somebody? Like, it might be beneficial for them to sign Aaron Rodgers for a year and then draft somebody in the draft to learn behind Aaron Rodgers. Who knows? But Pittsburgh is a proud franchise, and we've saw what Mike Tomlin has been able to do without having a solid quarterback for years now. They're always going to compete. The defense is always going to be good. But Pittsburgh is at a point where they have higher expectations, where they want to get back to winning. They want to get back to at least winning playoff games, and they haven't won a playoff game in a long time. So this year will be very interesting for them to see what they do and how these decisions affect Tomlin going forward. I have always said Mike Tomlin, to me, is one of the best coaches in the entire league, but sometimes for whatever reason he gets looked at as not that, like as if he should be replaced because they haven't had playoff success recently. And I'm like, there's only maybe 1 or 2 1 or 2 coaches who I would say are better than Mike Tomlin, and you're not getting one of those other 2 coaches to come to Pittsburgh. So what are you firing Tomlin for? That wouldn't make any sense, but fans are delusional and they make stupid things like that up. But it'll be interesting to see what they do this offseason and see how that impacts them and it impacts that division going forward. So that wraps it up for this week's episode. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Please make sure you like and subscribe and share wherever possible. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Peace.